Hi everyone, my name is Perry Sutton. I'm a trumpet player and I am La Fiocco's Artist of the Month for this month of March. It's been so fun watching everyone else's performances for the different artists leading up to this month, and doing the logistics for this, discussing them with Lewis. It was interesting because the trumpet presents such a unique challenge for the virtual format that we're in. It's been so lovely hearing all of the keyboard players and singers and string players be able to play full pieces and perform as they normally would, just without an audience. The challenge that the trumpet presents is that it is a fixed length instrument that only has access to a diatonic palette of notes to play. So, for instance, this instrument is set up in the key of D. It only can really draw notes from the key of D, and it's not chromatic. So, I can't play in equal half steps. I can't play chromatic scales on this instrument, which would really allow the instrument to imply harmony. So that's why when you see some of the larger orchestral pieces that feature trumpets, we're only on certain movements. We're only able to play in certain keys at a time. So when we want to change keys, we can't press a button and magically do that. We actually have to physically alter the length of our instrument by changing out tubing, to physically make the instrument longer. So if I were playing in D and needed to then also play in B flat, I would have to switch to a different instrument, which was really the way that the instrument functioned until the mid-19th century, early 19th century, with the advent of the valve, kind of putting the trumpet into the physical shape and form that we would recognize as a trumpet today. Before the early to mid 19th century, it looked much more something like this. So what I thought I'd do is discuss and kind of talk about what it's like to play both this instrument and kind of what the similarities and differences are between them. So I thought I'd start by doing a couple of examples on Baroque trumpet, and then transferring over and playing the same piece on a modern trumpet, and describing what some of those differences would be. So for the first example, I will play a little bit from the Gloria from Bach's B minor Mass. Then we'll contrast that with what this would typically be played on today, is a modern piccolo trumpet. The big difference here, aside from the valves, is the overall length of the instrument. This is roughly 1/4 the size of this instrument in terms of overall length. And if you can look, the bell is also a very different size and shape. So you'll hear in a second, that presents a very different sound. one thing that the valves allow us to do is they're going to make trilling a very different endeavor. So on the modern trumpet, if I wanted to perform a trill, it would simply be just by moving my fingers. If I were to go to do that on the Baroque trumpet, well, I don't have as many options. So for us, we also have to do a little bit of a different extended technique. It's similar to whistling. So it's basically done with the tongue and with the lips. Creates a very different effect to match with strings, match with the voice. The larger instrument is going to have a wider array of overtones in the sound that's going to kind of fit into the instrumental, into the orchestra a little bit more rather, and blend with singers a little bit better. So this, the instrument itself is a little bit harder to operate in terms of just ease of use, being point and shoot, but the music just obviously, as this is much more the instrument that Bach would have written for, it does lend to the music a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to get what the composer is going at. And then Bach wrote for this instrument. It would even go up into the times of Beethoven. Still would have written for an instrument like this. So this is in B flat, and we'll look at one of the fanfare calls from the end of one of the Leonore overtures. So first on the early instrument. So then to contrast that with what would be used in the modern orchestra now, this is a modern C trumpet, meaning it is in the key of C, but since it has valves, it is able to be fully chromatic. So this instrument is able to play in any key. So, as I mentioned before, the modern trumpet has the ability to be chromatic. But it's not like on the keyboard instrument where if you press a C, that note fires as a C. You press a C sharp, it's a totally different note. The way that a trumpet becomes chromatic actually relates all the way back to the fixed length instrument. The way that we change keys on the fixed length instrument is by physically changing the length of the tubing. So we have a B flat trumpet, we have an F trumpet, which is physically a lot smaller to get you up to that series of overtones. We have a D trumpet. With the modern trumpet, we have all these different lengths of valve tubing. That then, when you depress a valve, changes the length of the tubing. So it literally makes it a fixed length instrument, but it makes it several different. So then in the different combinations of the valves, we're able to get 7 different overall lengths of tubing. So if we take the fixed length instrument, I can show you here, here are the only real available notes on the fixed length instrument. So if I don't use valves on this instrument, I have a similar number of notes to use. Then if I depress one of the valves, another valve combination, and then so forth through the different valve combinations, which we have 7. So then if you combine all of those stacks of overtones together, through the 7 valve combinations, we get a chromatic scale. So that is what allows the trumpet to then be half as long. So it's no longer this length, which even folded over itself twice is about waist high to this guy. And then we can actually then play all of the same notes. Which allows us then to play more modern orchestral music. We can then keep up with the trends that were going on musically, where it didn't just kind of gravitate in the tonic and the dominant. As composers were getting more adventurous, the instrument needed the ability to be able to do that, and this allowed us to do that. It also, by making the instrument half as long, the overtones then get further apart, which lends a little bit more security. The targets get bigger of where we're aiming for notes. It really came about, the instrument evolution came about sort of in line with the musical progressions. The instrument was very much limited to what was called the Clarino style of playing in Bach and Handel's time. But then when we got to Mozart and to Haydn, trumpets started being treated more in the vein of a militaristic or a percussive manner. And this really allowed the instrument to expand back into being a solo instrument. Which kind of then gets us to where we are with the instrument today in the form that we're looking at. So much in the way that we had the B flat trumpet and the D trumpet and the F trumpet and E flat and C, there were 5 or 6 keys that the trumpet was known to be written in. That is sort of trickled down in the lineage of the instrument to now, where your modern orchestral player is going to generally use a C trumpet, or your commercial or jazz player is going to use a B flat trumpet. The only difference between the two is the B flat trumpet is physically longer, setting it a key lower. But mechanically, it's the same principle. All the way down to what I played before is the modern Piccolo Trumpet, which is, again, this instrument is half the length of this instrument, which is then, in turn, half the length of this instrument. So it provides a completely different set of overtones, but based on the same fundamental pitch. It became, this was the last survivor of a bunch of different systems. Haydn and Hummel wrote for a version of this instrument that had something on it that looked like saxophone keys. So Haydn's famous trumpet concerto was written for a fixed length instrument that had saxophone style keys on it that allowed it to play chromatically, but it didn't exactly have the same even sound that a trumpet now would have, because it was being vented at such a large degree. Then another attempt to make the instrument chromatic, this actually goes back even further, would have been the slide trumpet. So we here have a slide. Certain cantatas, certain of Bach's cantatas, had chorale tunes written for this instrument. Purcell wrote for his funeral music for Queen, I believe funeral music for Queen Anne was written for 3 of these and a sackbut, so a trombone, performing in a choir. But again, it wasn't a totally long-term solution that we arrived at with the modern trumpet. But hopefully we could see in the examples that I played, the Bach and the Beethoven, that the character of the instrument is just such a different sound, and at least in my opinion, the fixed length instrument that the composers were writing for just has a much more authentic and charming sound. So I hope this was enlightening and at least helpful, and I hope to see some of you again at concerts. The real hard part of this whole thing hasn't been as much the music, which has been very difficult, but it's been not seeing and working with my colleagues and seeing the audience and playing for a live audience. It's just an energy that is so depressingly and sorely missed. So I can't wait to see you all again, and I can't wait to play for you again, and I hope that's as soon as possible. Have a great month, everyone, and hope to see you soon. Stay safe. Bye-bye.